The prophet Jeremiah prophesied and said, because Israel has sinned against God, they would be cast into captivity and they would be dispersed among the nations. At the time when Daniel arrives on the scene, King Nebuchadnezzar had came into Israel. He had broken down the temple. They had taken all the utensils from the temple. They had broken down the temple so that not one stone was left upon another. And they took all the people into captivity into Babylon. Daniel was one of those men who were a wise man who was chosen. His name was changed so that he would forget his identity and his nation, in order to raise him up to become a wise man in the kingdom of Babylon. It was during this time that the king of Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar, had a dream. And in his dream he saw a great statue, and he was very upset and he was very disturbed, and he wanted to understand what the statue meant. But Nebuchadnezzar, being a wise king, went to all his wise men, and he said to them, "You must tell me what I have dreamt." And they said, "It is impossible. No one can tell you what you've dreamt. No wise man or interpreter or scholar or satrap can even do that. Tell us your dream and we'll explain it to you." And Nebuchadnezzar said, "No. I know that you want to deceive me. I want you to tell me my dream and what it means." Now that's quite a tall order. It is not possible for a man to understand what he had dreamt and what its interpretation is, unless God is the interpreter of that dream. We know in that time how Daniel came to a certain point, finding out that that King Nebuchadnezzar was so angry that no one could interpret his dream, that he decided to kill all the wise men. And Daniel said, "No, ask the king for time." And he says, "I'll pray and ask my God to give me the interpretation." And he went to Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and asked them to pray with him so that they could get the interpretation of the dream. And when the dream came to Daniel, Yahweh, the God of heaven and earth, gave Daniel both the dream as well as the interpretation of the dream. And Daniel was brought before the king. And this is what Daniel said in Daniel chapter 2, verse 29. "As for you, O king, you were lying upon your bed, and thoughts came into your mind about what should come to pass hereafter. And he reveals secrets, was making known to you what shall come to pass. But as for me, this secret was not revealed to me for any wisdom that I have more than anyone else living, but in order that the interpretation may be made known to the king, and that you may know the thoughts of your heart and mind. You, O king, saw, and behold, there was a great image. This image was mighty and of exceedingly great brightness stood before you, and the appearance of it was frightening and terrible. As for this image, his head was of fine gold, its breasts and its arms were of silver, and its belly and its thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, and its feet partly of iron and partly of clay, and the baked clay of a potter. As you looked, a stone was cut out without human hands, which smote the image on its feet of iron and baked clay of the potter, and broke them to pieces. Then the iron, the baked clay of the potter, the bronze, the silver, the gold were broken and crushed together, and became like chaff on the threshing floor, and the wind carried them away, so that no trace of them could be found. And the stone that smote the image became a great mountain or a rock that filled the whole earth. This was the dream. And now we will tell the interpretation of it to the king. We see that Nebuchadnezzar had a dream about a statue. And Daniel tells him that he dreamt about a statue with a head of gold, breast and thighs of silver, breast and arms of silver, thighs of bronze, legs of iron, and feet mixed with iron and clay. And suddenly, out of nowhere, came a rock, cut but not by human hands. And it struck this statue on its feet of iron and clay, and broke them to pieces, and crushed the entire statue, so that it would become like powder, and then the wind blew it away. What does the dream of the king mean? In order for us to understand prophecy, this is the place where God started to reveal to King Nebuchadnezzar what's going to happen in the future. In Daniel 2 verse 37, Daniel started to interpret the king's dream, saying, "You, O king, are the king of the earthly kings, to whom the God of heaven has given the kingdom, the power, the might, and the glory. And wherever the children of men dwell, and the beasts of the field and the birds of the air, he has given them into your hand, and has made you to rule over them all. You, king of Babylon, are the head of gold." Daniel reveals to Nebuchadnezzar that his kingdom, the kingdom of Babylon, is represented by the statue's head of gold. "And after you shall arise another kingdom, inferior to yours, and still a third kingdom of bronze, which shall bear rule over all the earth. And the fourth kingdom shall be strong as iron, since iron breaks to pieces and subdue all things. And like iron which crushes, it shall break and crush all these." It was further revealed to Daniel that all the rest of the metal parts of this statue are different kingdoms. He says the first kingdom is the kingdom of Babylon, the head of gold. The second kingdom is the kingdom that is called a kingdom of silver. It consists out of two parts, like the breasts and the two arms of silver. Then there was also another kingdom called the kingdom of bronze, which would subdue all nations, but yet it would be inferior to those before it. And finally, he describes the kingdom of iron. Two legs of this statue, which is made out of iron. This age was also called the age of the Iron Age, just like the age before it was called the Bronze Age. In these ages, which is very amazing, the different steel that was developed was bronze, and later steel was developed, and swords were made that were so powerful and used by the Romans. Then he continues and say that there would be an extended part of the last kingdom, which is called the feet. And he says, "As the toes of the feet were partly of iron and partly of by clay of the potter, so this kingdom shall be partly strong and partly brittle and broken. And as you saw the iron mixed with mire and earth and clay, so they shall mingle themselves in the seed of men, in marriage bonds, but they will not hold together. For two such elements or ideologies can never harmonize, even as iron does not mingle itself with clay. And in the days of these final 10 kings shall the God of heaven set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed, nor shall its sovereignty be left to another, but it shall break and crush and consume all these kingdoms, and it shall stand forever. And just as you saw that the stone was cut out of the mountain without hands, and that it broke in pieces the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, the gold, the great God has made known to the king what shall come to pass hereafter. The dream is certain, and the interpretation of it is sure." Daniel reveals to King Nebuchadnezzar, although he thinks that he is the king of kings, that he is the mightiest king that the earth has ever known. He says, yet there will come a kingdom that is so powerful, after this kingdom of the feet that is even weaker than all the other kingdoms. It will have some of the strength of iron on the inside of it, yet it will not mix or mingle. In this seminar, as Yeshua allows us, we will reveal to you what the clay and the iron and what these kingdoms represented and what they will represent also in our time. He says he saw in that time that a rock will be cut out. It will be cut out not by human hands. Therefore, what is about to happen, Yahweh will set up a kingdom, the kingdom that will be reigned by the King of Judah, the Lion of Judah, Yeshua, the Lord our righteousness. And he will come and he will break all these kingdoms and bring them to an end. He says that rock that struck the statue, it grew and became a huge mountain, and the mountain filled the whole earth. And this mountain will now is a representation of the kingdom of God. He says, in the time of those 10 kings, God will set up a kingdom. There's been many controversies about what the interpretation of the final 10 kings actually is. And God willing, we will look at the great depths that is hidden behind the 10 kings when we get to the seminar about explaining the book of Revelations. But here it says that in that time God will set up a kingdom that will never be destroyed. As we have seen earlier, God took me into the heavens so that I could understand the way that He spoke to the prophets. He showed them both the past and the future at the same time. That which Daniel saw was his own time, looking into the future. But the feet are also for a time that we will look at in the book of Revelation, of Yeshua, that represents not only one specific time, but a time when John spoke, when 10 kings ruled in his own time, when Yeshua came to set up his kingdom on the earth, pouring out his Holy Spirit on the day of Pentecost. But now, once more, a final kingdom will be set up on the earth. As a shadow picture of that which has happened, the kingdom will now be set up and bring to fulfillment that which was prophesied and revealed to King Nebuchadnezzar. It is in this time, now right at the end of time, at the end of this age, that Yahweh will set up a kingdom that will never be destroyed, that will become like a huge mountain that will fill the whole earth, when He will set up His 1,000-year millennial reign as King of Kings and Lord of Lords. If we briefly look at this statue of Nebuchadnezzar, we look over time at what has happened from Daniel's time up until our time, all the way through, nearly 2,500 years later. We saw that in Daniel's time, the king of Nebuchadnezzar, the Babylonian Empire, existed. And after the Babylonian Empire came the Medo-Persian Empire. And after the Medo-Persian Empire came the Greek Empire, which is the Empire of Bronze. And after that was replaced by the Caesars in the Roman Empire, which is the Iron Age. But the Roman Empire in 476 AD changed over hands. It was never destroyed, but only changed into a kingdom of iron and clay, and became brittle and yet remained as gruesome as the Roman Empire, which we will call for now the Holy Roman Empire. When we look at the history of the kingdoms that existed from the Old Testament all the way through until the Roman Empire, we see that at the time of around 1000 BC, before Christ, there existed the kingdom of Chaldea. Around 625 BC, the kingdom of Chaldea existed. Around 606 BC, the Babylonian Empire had its beginning and started to reign over all the earth. From the time of 6 BC all the way through to around 536 BC, the Babylonian Empire reigned. It was then replaced by another king, which in its time was the kings of the Medes and the Persians. The kings of the Medes and the Persians started off with the reign of Belshazzar. And Belshazzar reigned from a period of the year of 552 BC all the way through to the third year of Cyrus of Persia in 533 BC. And Cyrus's reign, which was the Persian, reigned through to 330 BC, and that was the end of the Medo-Persian Empire. After the Medo-Persian Empire, the Bronze Empire, which is the Greek Empire, came to pass. From the time of 332 BC until 31 BC, the Greek Empire reigned, went all the way through from Alexander the Great, through the divided kingdom of Alexander the Great. Around the time of 65 BC, before the Greek Empire came to its end, a mighty empire arose, called the Roman Empire, and strengthening itself, it finally took over and finished the Greek Empire and reigned itself until 476 AD, when the Roman Empire came to its end. It was during this time, from 65 BC to 476 AD, that Yeshua al-Messiah came, was born, and he did his ministry for a period of 3.5 years. And in the middle of the 7-week time, he came and he was cut off, but not for himself. And we will see this as it was revealed to Daniel in the rest of the book of Daniel. 52 years after King Nebuchadnezzar had the dream about the statue, another great king came, Belshazzar. In the first year of King Belshazzar, Daniel had a dream. And in Daniel 7 verse 1, Daniel tells us about the dream that he had, which really troubled his mind. He says, "In the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, I, Daniel, had a dream, and visions in his head, and he was laying upon his bed. Then he wrote down the dream and told the guest of the matter. Daniel said, I saw in my vision by night, and behold, 4 winds of heaven, political and social agitations, were stirring up the great sea and the nations of the world. And 4 great beasts came up out of the sea in succession, different the one from another." Daniel saw different beasts coming out of the sea being, as the book of the Amplified describes it, out of the sea of nations. So out of all the peoples of the earth came these different beasts. And they came in succession, and they were or represented political and social agitations. and they were different from one another. In the rest of the seminar to follow, we'll be looking in detail at these 4 beasts and what they represented in the time of Daniel and how they will fulfill in our time. In Daniel chapter 7 verse 4, Daniel describes to us the 4 beasts that he sees coming out of the sea of the nations, saying, the first, the Babylonian Empire under Nebuchadnezzar, was like a lion, and had eagle's wings. And I looked till the wings of it were plucked, and it was lifted up from the earth, and made to stand upon 2 feet as a man, and a man's heart was given to it. Now we know that Daniel have now seen the first beast, and he says this beast was like a lion, and it had these wings like an eagle. What does this beast represent? The Babylonian Empire was represented by the sign of a lion having wings. So this kingdom is the kingdom of the Babylonian Empire. This is also the very same kingdom that was represented by the head of gold in Nebuchadnezzar's dream, when he said, you, O king, are the king of the earthly kings, to whom the God of heaven has given the kingdom, the power, the might, and the glory. Wherever the children of men dwell, and the beasts of the field, and the birds of the air, he has given you power over them. He says, you, king, are that head of gold. I will also see that we will start in this seminar to count the amount of heads of each of these beasts. The reason we will do this is because of the explanation that will follow from the book of Revelations in what the apostle and prophet John saw regards our time. We see that the lion's head we count as the first head of the beast. Then Daniel said, and behold, another beast, a second, like a bear, and it raised itself up on one side, and 3 ribs were in its mouth between its teeth. And it was told, arise, devour much flesh. Daniel saw a bear that came up out of the water. And he says this bear had 3 ribs in its mouth. We know that it was also raised up on one side. Now why was it raised up on one side? Because it was a representation of another kingdom, which was also raised up in one side. It had one higher kingdom and a lower kingdom. That one kingdom was subdued to the other kingdom, and this was called the Medo-Persian Empire, just as it was in the statue which Nebuchadnezzar saw of the chest and the arms that was silver. This beast also had one head, the head of a bear. The next beast that the prophet Daniel saw was a very different beast. He saw in Daniel chapter 7 verse 6 saying, after this I looked, and behold, another like a leopard, which had 4 wings of a bird or a fowl, and on its back the beast also had 4, and dominion was given to it. Daniel now sees another beast. This time it's like a leopard. It is sly, and it is quick, and it attacks its enemy fast and furious. He says it has 4 heads, and it also had 4 wings, like the wings of a fowl. When we look at this beast, we see the 3rd beast coming up out of the sea of nations. This beast is represented by the next kingdom in Nebuchadnezzar's dream, which was the thighs of bronze, which is the Greek Empire. But this beast had 4 heads. Now if we continue counting from the lion, we see that we now have the 3rd head, the 4th, the 5th, and the 6th head. It's also very important to remember that this leopard had the wings of a fowl, or in other words, a chicken or a rooster. We know from Daniel's vision that he saw 4 beasts. And the 4th beast that he saw in Daniel 7 verse 7, Daniel says, "After this I saw in the night visions, and behold, a 4th beast, terrible, powerful, and dreadful, and exceedingly strong. It had great iron teeth. It devoured and crushed and trampled what was left with its feet. And it was different from all the beasts that came before it, and it had 10 horns." The beast that Daniel now sees coming up out of the sea, he says, is a terrible beast. It's a beast like he has never seen before. He says this beast is powerful and it is fearful and dreadful. He says it's crushing and trampling everything with its feet of iron. Now we know that Nebuchadnezzar had a dream where in his statue he saw 2 legs of iron. This beast's claws are represented of this kingdom, which is the iron kingdom of the Roman Empire. He says this Roman Empire is so powerful it crushes everything that is in its way. He says, but it was different from all the other beasts that came up before it. It had 10 horns. So this kingdom was a kingdom that was divided in the very fact that although it was one strong and powerful kingdom, in the end it was very divided, having 10 kings. These 10 kings are represented over a time in the Roman Empire when the Roman Caesars existed. We know that 10 Roman Caesars came from the time of Yeshua. But this also represents another great and awesome revelation we will look at later. So what we now have is we have the 4th beast, and we have one other head, but it has 10 different horns. So we have the 7th head with 10 different horns. In this 4th kingdom, Yahweh revealed to Daniel that there will be an internal infighting inside of this kingdom. And in Daniel 7 verse 8 he says, "I considered the horns, and behold, there came up among them another horn, a little one." So among these horns of 10 suddenly arises another horn. "And I considered the horns, and behold, there came up among them a little one, another one, before which 3 of the first horns were plucked up by the roots." Daniel saw how this little horn came and removed 3 of the first horns of this beast, and he destroyed them or plucked them up in some way, removing them from their power and from their reign. So we see that this kingdom is divided, having a divided reign with kings, and suddenly 3 of those first horns are plucked up by the roots. This kingdom that's represented here is represented by the last part in the statue of Nebuchadnezzar's dream. He saw feet that were partly of iron and partly of baked clay, having 10 toes. So the 10 toes in Nebuchadnezzar's dream represents also the 10 horns, the kingdom that is divided into 10 parts, right at the end of time, before Yeshua sets up his kingdom. A horn in the Old Testament represented the strength of a person. When David said, "You are the horn of my strength, you are my horn," the altar had horns which on the 4 corners could be held by a man to go and ask Yahweh for strength. Now these horns are horns that set themselves up in a kingdom against God. For he says that on this animal there was names, and these names are blasphemous names. So these kings are kings that set themselves up in the place of Yeshua, our Messiah, in the place of kingship of the Lord of Lords. The little horn removed the kingdoms one by one. First the first horn, then the second horn, and then the third horn. You might ask, what does these three different horns represent, and who are they? In the rest of the seminar, we'll be looking at who the little horn is, and what Yeshua had revealed to us, who the little horn will be in our time. But in order to understand the prophecy, we need to also understand the history, because history fulfills itself. The one is a shadow picture of the other one. The way that the prophet sees from peak to peak, we said. The peak is very similar events in history that will be similarly fulfilled in the future. So the event in the past was a partial fulfillment of the prophet's word, which will finally come to a full fulfillment when its shadow picture is reached and when history repeats itself. I consider the horns, and behold, there came up among them another one, a little one. So Daniel saw this little horn that came up before the three that was removed. And he says, then in this horn were eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth speaking great things was in this horn. So this horn was a very curious horn. And as we see from Daniel's prophecy, Yahweh is trying to explain something to us regards this little horn. And there has been great controversy regards even who the little horn actually is. This little horn, he said, had eyes in and mouth. So it is actually a person. And this person has a mouth, and he was speaking great, or as the translation says, blasphemous words against the God Most High in heaven. When we briefly look at history and at Daniel's 4 beasts which he saw in his vision, we see that the lion, which was Babylon, appeared in a time from time of 606 BC until 536 BC, when the Medo-Persian Empire took over the Babylonian Empire, which is the bear, and lasted from 536 BC until 332 BC, when the leopard, or the empire of the Greeks, actually came into existence. And from 332 BC until 65 BC, the Greek Empire ruled and reigned for nearly 300 years. Then from 65 BC until 476 AD, the terrible beast of Daniel, the 4th beast of Daniel, which is the Roman Empire, ruled, and was the legs of iron of Nebuchadnezzar's dream. And from 476 BC until 1948, we see that there was going to be 10 kings that will rule, and there would be a little horn, another horn that would come up, and it would destroy 3 of the first horns, which had a meaning and understanding which we'll see later of how the little horn was Constantine, and later was also Hitler. From a time when of 614 AD to 638 AD, the Muslims besieged and finally took Jerusalem. And at 688 AD, the Dome of the Rock was built. From the time that the Dome of the Rock was built until 1948 AD, when Israel became a state, on the 15th of May, a period of 1,260 years lapsed, when Muslim dominion over Israel came to an end. And we know that 20 years later, Jerusalem was finally taken back from Muslim dominion. This gives us a brief breakdown. We also see the cross of Jesus Christ appear between 65 BC and 476 AD, when Yeshua was crucified and died on the cross during the Roman Empire. After Daniel saw these visions, he saw a great and awesome vision about the Ancient of Days. In Daniel 7 verse 9 he says, I kept looking until thrones were placed, for the assessors were the judge. And the Ancient of Days, God, the Eternal Father, took his seat, whose garment was as white as snow, and his hair of his head was like pure wool. This is an awesome description of Yeshua, our Messiah, which is also very similar described in Revelations chapter 20 verse 4. It says his throne was like a fiery flame, its wheels were burning fire. A stream of fire came forth before him, and 1,000 thousands ministered to him, and 10,000 times 10,000 rose up and stood before him. The judge was seated, and the court was in session, and books were opened. Daniel saw a court case in heaven, and he saw how Yeshua came to the Father after he was resurrected from the dead, and how the court was seated, and how the power of Satan was taken. And although at that time Yeshua broke the power of all principalities and powers, making a public spectacle of them, triumphing over them by the cross, yet for a time and for a season this beast and his kingdom, his time would be prolonged until Yeshua would come to take his rulership on the earth. It says, and at the time of the end the judge was seated, and the court was in session, and the books were opened. We know that Daniel said that the books will be opened at that time. Now Daniel says to us that a stream of fire came forth from before him. We will see, as Yeshua had revealed to us, how a stream of fire of his judgment will come forth from his mouth, judging the beast and all that they have determined in these last days. It says that 10,000 times 10,000 ministered before him. Then he looked and he saw in verse 11, he saw a sound of the great words which the horn was speaking. And I watched until the beast was slain, and his body destroyed and given over to be burned with fire. This beast, which is actually the entire beast of Nebuchadnezzar, which is also a conglomerate beast of 10 horns, he sees how this beast will be burnt with fire, and it will be destroyed by the wrath of God. Just as Nebuchadnezzar saw a rock that struck the statue on its feet and broke it into pieces, crushing it and making it powder. He says, as for the rest of the beasts, their power of dominion was taken away, yet their lives were prolonged, for the duration of their lives was fixed for a season and a time. So God is saying to us that for a season and a time, which is a prophetic season, they would remain until a time would come when their dominion would be taken away from them. He says, I saw in the night visions, and behold, on the clouds of heaven came one like the Son of Man. He sees a glorious vision. He sees how the Son of Man came, and how he came on the clouds of heaven. And he came to the Ancient of Days, and was presented before him. And there was given him, the Messiah, the dominion and the glory and the kingdom, that all peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. And his dominion is an everlasting dominion which shall not pass away, and his kingdom is one which shall not be destroyed. We know that God revealed to Nebuchadnezzar that at the time of the end, his kingdom and all the other kingdoms that in succession to his kingdom, even though they were inferior, would all be destroyed by a kingdom which is the kingdom of God. When God will set up his millennial reign to reign for 1,000 years. We will look at the reigns of the kingdoms in a short while again. But when we look at it, we see a magnificent picture of how short these reigns are compared to the reign of the kingdom that he will set up on the earth, which will be forever and forever. But when Daniel saw these great beasts and all these things that happened, he was greatly disturbed and anxious about the little horn and about its power and what it represented. And he says his visions of his head alarmed him, and really it disturbed him, and he wanted to know the meaning of these visions.